Taehyung didn't say a word when he saw it. He didn't gasp. He didn't step back. He didn't interrupt the moment that was never meant for him to witness. He just stood there, frozen in the narrow hallway, his hand gripping the strap of his duffel bag so tightly his knuckles turned white. Through the half-closed glass door, he saw Jungkook. And he saw her. Not clearly at first, just shapes, shadows, movement. But then the light shifted and the reflection sharpened enough to steal the air from his lungs. Her hand was on Jungkook's cheek. Not rushed. Not accidental. Not the kind of touch that could be explained away later. Jungkook leaned in. And she didn't pull away. The kiss wasn't dramatic. It wasn't desperate. That was the worst part. It was soft, familiar, like something that had happened before or something that had been wanted long enough to stop pretending it was a mistake. And then Jungkook lifted his eyes. For half a second his gaze met Taehyung through the glass. Not with shock, not with guilt, but with something worse. Confusion, as if Taehyung wasn't supposed to be there, as if Taehyung was the disruption, not the betrayal. That was the moment something inside Taehyung collapsed. He turned away before the door could open. The sound of his suitcase hitting the floor echoed too loudly down the corridor. A sharp, ugly noise that felt like reality finally breaking through denial. Someone laughed behind him. The sound came from the dressing room. Music was still playing. People were still celebrating something, a successful rehearsal, a finished schedule, a normal night. Taehyung picked up the bag. He didn't look back. Taehyung, a voice called, Hoseok's maybe, or Jimin's, he couldn't tell. Sound felt distorted now like he was underwater. Another voice followed, concerned, confused. Did something happen? Taehyung kept walking. Footsteps approached. A hand grabbed his wrist gently but firmly. Hey, what's going on? Namjoon. Taehyung finally stopped. He didn't turn around. Don't follow me, he said. His voice didn't shake. That surprised even him. It wasn't anger that filled his chest. It was emptiness. A clean, hollow space where something important had just been ripped out without anesthesia. He stepped outside into the December night. The cold hit him like betrayal made physical, sharp, unforgiving, honest. The city lights blurred as he walked. His breath fogged the air, steady and controlled. His hands weren't trembling. His heart wasn't racing. But something vital inside him was collapsing silently, like a cathedral burning from the inside while the walls still stood. Hours earlier, they had all been together. A small gathering after rehearsals, staff members, a few familiar faces, laughter, drinks. Someone had brought food, someone else had put music on low. She had been there too. Jungkook had introduced her casually, almost carelessly. She's just a friend, he'd said. We met during a campaign shoot. Just a friend. A stylist's assistant, harmless, temporary, nothing to worry about. Taehyung had believed him. Because he wanted to. Because Jungkook had looked at him that night the same way he always did. Like Taehyung was home. Like the world made more sense when Taehyung was nearby. Or maybe Taehyung had imagined that part. The taxi driver asked where he was going. Anywhere, Taehyung replied. He ended up at an apartment Jungkook didn't know about. A place Taehyung used when he wanted to disappear from everything that knew his name. He didn't turn on the lights. He sat on the floor instead of the bed, his back against the wall, knees pulled to his chest. The city skyline blinked outside the window, cold and artificial. His phone vibrated. Once. Twice. Again. Jungkook. Then the others. Taehyung didn't open any of them. He stared at the dark screen like it might crack open and explain how everything had gone wrong so quietly. He remembered small things. The way Jungkook used to hesitate before touching him, like Taehyung was fragile. The way Jungkook used to glance across crowded rooms just to make sure Taehyung was still there. The warmth, the shared silence, the private universe that had existed between them without needing names. Was it real? Had it ever been? At 3:12 a.m., someone knocked on the door. Taehyung didn't move. The knocking grew more urgent. Then Jungkook's voice broke through the wood. "Taehyung, please, let me explain." His voice cracked on the last word. Taehyung stayed where he was. He let the silence answer. He could hear Jungkook outside, breathing unevenly. He could hear the sound of someone trying not to cry and failing anyway. But Taehyung didn't open the door. Because if he did, he wasn't sure he would survive hearing the explanation. Inside the apartment, Taehyung didn't cry. He couldn't. His chest felt too heavy for tears, like his lungs were filled with ash instead of air. He closed his eyes and whispered to no one, "Why did you look at her like that, when you used to look at me like I was home?" Outside, Jungkook eventually stopped knocking. The hallway went quiet, and something in Taehyung understood, with terrifying clarity, that nothing would ever be simple again. The pale light slipping through the curtains didn't feel like a new beginning. It felt like exposure, like the world was waking up and expecting Taehyung to move with it, even though something inside him had stopped completely. He hadn't slept. Not really. He'd spent the night half awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the same image over and over again. Jungkook's hand at her waist, her fingers on his cheek. The way the kiss hadn't looked rushed or confused, the way it had looked chosen. His phone buzzed again. Taehyung didn't need to look to know who it was. He finally checked the screen. 17 missed calls. Messages stacked on top of each other, unread. Jungkook, Namjoon, Jimin, Hoseok, the manager. Taehyung set the phone face down. He showered in silence, letting the water run too hot, grounding himself in sensation. When he stepped out, his reflection in the mirror looked unfamiliar. His eyes were dull, his face calmer than he felt. He packed properly this time. Clothes folded with care, passport, wallet, sunglasses, the ring Jungkook had once given him, tucked into the bottom of the bag without ceremony. By the time he stepped outside, his decision felt irreversible. The city was already alive. Cars passed, people laughed, coffee shops opened their doors like nothing had fractured overnight. At the dorm, panic had settled in. Namjoon stood by the kitchen counter, phone pressed to his ear, his jaw tight. Jimin paced the living room, hands twisting together. Hoseok sat on the couch, staring at the floor like he was replaying something he wished he hadn't seen. Jungkook hadn't slept either. He sat alone in his room, elbows on his knees, head buried in his hands. The image of Taehyung turning away replayed relentlessly in his mind. The sound of the suitcase hitting the floor haunted him more than any accusation could have. He hadn't followed Taehyung. That was the mistake. News broke faster than anyone expected. A fan account posted a blurry photo taken near the back entrance of the building. Jungkook and a woman, too close to deny, too vague to explain away. Speculation exploded. Was it dating? Was it cheating? Who was she? Why was Taehyung missing from practice? Hashtags climbed. The company stayed silent. Taehyung didn't return to the dorm. He didn't show up to rehearsal. He didn't answer the manager's calls. 3 days passed like a suspended breath. It was Yoongi who finally found him. Taehyung was on a rooftop, lying flat against the cold concrete, staring at a sky stripped of color. The wind tugged at his coat, sharp and unrelenting. "You can't run forever," Yoongi said, sitting beside him. Taehyung didn't respond. "He's not okay," Yoongi continued. "None of us are, but him especially." Taehyung swallowed. He hasn't slept, Yoongi said. He's destroyed. So am I, Taehyung replied quietly. Yoongi studied him for a long moment, then go destroy each other face to face. That night, Taehyung returned to the dorm. Jungkook was in the kitchen, holding a mug with both hands like it was the only thing keeping him upright. When he looked up and saw Taehyung, the mug slipped from his fingers. It shattered on the floor, and something inside both of them shattered with it. They didn't hug. They didn't shout. Words came out raw and unpolished, cutting deeper because none of them were rehearsed. She kissed me, Jungkook said hoarsely. You kissed her back. I froze. You chose. Silence swallowed the room. When Taehyung turned to leave, Jungkook asked, Do you still believe I loved you? Taehyung didn't look back. That's the problem, he said. I still do. No cameras caught that moment. No headlines recorded it. But the damage lived in every performance that followed, in every pause, every lyric that once belonged to them and now sounded like a goodbye disguised as art. Time passed. Not gently. The woman disappeared from the public narrative as quietly as she had entered it. No statements, no explanations, just absence. Maybe she never mattered. Or maybe she had been a mirror, reflecting cracks that had already been forming. Jungkook never stopped wishing he had pulled away faster. Taehyung never asked for another explanation. And the distance between them settled into something heavier than anger. It settled into grief. The silence between them didn't end after that night. It followed them into rehearsals where Taehyung stood a step farther than usual, into meetings where Jungkook avoided his eyes like looking might undo him, into performances where everything looked perfect to the audience and felt completely hollow backstage. No one said it out loud, but everyone felt it. Something sacred had cracked. The company tried to move forward quickly. Momentum, they called it, distraction, routine, as if repetition could erase what had already been burned into memory. Taehyung showed up. On time. Prepared. Professional. He smiled when he was supposed to. He hit every note. He danced like his body remembered joy even when his heart didn't. Fans praised his focus, his strength, his maturity. They didn't see the way his hands shook after shows, or how he sat alone in dressing rooms long after everyone else had left, staring at nothing, replaying moments he wished he could unsee. Jungkook watched him from a distance. He wanted to reach out, to apologize again, to say something different, something better. But every time he opened his mouth, he remembered Taehyung's face behind the glass, the way Taehyung had looked at him like he didn't recognize the person staring back. That look hurt more than any accusation. Late one night, after a live recording, Jungkook waited outside Taehyung's dressing room. An hour passed. Then another. Staff came and went, the hallway emptied, lights dimmed. Finally, the door opened. Taehyung stepped out, dressed in black hair, damp expression unreadable. Jungkook straightened instinctively. Can we talk? Taehyung didn't slow down. Not here. Then where? Taehyung stopped. Anywhere you weren't with her. The words landed quietly. They cut anyway. They ended up in an empty practice room. The mirrors reflected too much. Two versions of themselves stared back, familiar and foreign all at once. Jungkook sat on the floor, elbows on his knees. She came to congratulate me, he said. She leaned in. It happened fast. Taehyung laughed, but there was no humor in it. You perform in front of stadiums. You know how to control a moment. I froze. Convenient. That's not fair. Neither was what I saw. Jungkook's voice cracked. Because I love you. Taehyung shook his head slowly. Then you should have remembered that before letting someone else touch what wasn't theirs. Silence pressed in around them, heavy with memory. The nights spent talking until dawn. The hands held under tables. The promises never spoken out loud, but understood anyway. Taehyung turned toward the mirror. "Do you know what I've been doing?" he asked quietly. "Trying to erase your name from every corner of my mind. It's like pulling glass out of my skin." "I'm sorry. That's not enough." "I know. Then why are you still here?" "Because I don't know how to exist without you." Taehyung turned back, his voice low, dangerously calm. "You should have thought about that before you became someone I couldn't recognize." Jungkook stood. "Do you want me to beg?" "I want you to hurt," Taehyung said honestly, "because I already do." Jungkook stepped closer, too close. "Then tell me what to do." "Tell the truth," Taehyung said. "Did you ever love her?" Jungkook hesitated. That hesitation shattered something final. "I loved the way she looked at me," Jungkook admitted. "Like I wasn't broken, like I wasn't confused." Taehyung's breath caught. "So I didn't make you feel that way." "You made me feel too much," Jungkook said softly, "and that scared me." Taehyung took a step back. "And now you want me to heal you after you shattered me." "I want you to see me trying." "I see you lying," Taehyung replied. "To yourself, to me." Jungkook's hands trembled. "Then what do you want from me?" Taehyung stared at him, eyes wet but distant. "I want you to remember this moment exactly the way I'm looking at you, because this is the last time I'll ever love you like this." Jungkook staggered back as if struck. "Don't say that. It's already true." Taehyung walked past him, hand on the door, pausing only once. "You broke me, but the worst part is you made me think I broke you first." He left. Jungkook collapsed to the floor, breath torn from his chest by the weight of everything he had just lost. The headlines exploded the next morning. Taehyung leaves stage mid-performance after emotional breakdown. Jungkook spotted alone, refuses to comment. Fans divided over sudden rift. None of them knew the real conversation that had happened behind closed doors. None of them heard the words that had hollowed two people out with surgical precision. That night, Taehyung stood alone backstage, microphone still warm in his hand, eyes refusing to meet the camera as cheers thundered around him. Every lyric felt like a confession he never meant to sing. And Jungkook listened from the hallway, forehead pressed against the cold wall, realizing too late that some mistakes didn't fade. They echoed. The days that followed felt unreal. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just quietly unbearable. Schedules continued as if nothing had happened. Managers spoke carefully. Meetings were filled with words like stability, unity, and professionalism. Smiles were rehearsed. Statements were drafted but never released. Everything looked normal. Taehyung felt anything but. He performed because it was expected, because stopping would invite questions he wasn't ready to answer, because standing on stage was easier than sitting alone with his thoughts. But something inside him had shifted. Where love once lived, there was now a constant ache, not sharp enough to scream, not dull enough to ignore. It followed him everywhere, in the mirror, in the reflection of windows, in the empty space beside him at night. Jungkook tried to keep his distance. Not out of indifference. Out of fear. Fear that one wrong word would make things worse. Fear that looking too long would remind Taehyung of something that could never be untouched again. He watched Taehyung laugh with staff, joke lightly during breaks, bow politely to fans. And every time, it felt like witnessing someone survive a storm while quietly bleeding. Late one evening, after another rehearsal that stretched too long, Taehyung found himself alone in the vocal booth. The lights were low. The glass reflected his face back at him, fractured by angles and shadows. He sang. Not the song on the schedule. Something slower, softer, words he'd written years ago and never meant to release, Lyrics about safety, about being seen, about loving someone so completely it scared you. His voice cracked halfway through. He stopped, pressed his forehead against the glass, and breathed through the pain until it dulled enough to move again. Someone had been listening. Jungkook stood on the other side of the glass, frozen. Taehyung didn't turn around. "I didn't mean for you to hear that," he said quietly. "I know," Jungkook replied. Silence filled the booth. Then Taehyung spoke again. "Do you know what hurts the most?" Jungkook swallowed. "Tell me." "You didn't just kiss her," Taehyung said. "You made me feel replaceable." "That was never." "I know," Taehyung cut in, "but feelings don't care about intention." Jungkook's voice dropped. "I hate myself for that." "I don't need you to hate yourself," Taehyung said. "I need you to understand why I can't just go back." "I do understand," Jungkook said, tears threatening, "and I still want to try." Taehyung finally turned to face him. "Trying doesn't undo what happened." "No," Jungkook admitted, "but it's all I have left." Taehyung studied him for a long moment, the boy he'd loved, the man standing in front of him now, familiar, changed. "I don't know if I can ever trust you the same way again," Taehyung said. Jungkook nodded. "Then don't." Taehyung frowned. "What?" "Don't trust me the same," Jungkook continued. "Trust me differently. Let me earn it again, piece by piece." The words hung in the air, fragile and dangerous. Before Taehyung could respond, a staff member knocked lightly on the door. Time was up. Reality called them back to places they weren't ready to face. That night, Taehyung lay awake in his apartment, staring at the ceiling. He replayed Jungkook's words again and again. Earn it again. The idea terrified him, because part of him wanted to believe it. And believing again felt more dangerous than leaving. The next morning, everything changed. A video surfaced online. Grainy, zoomed in, taken from the hallway the night of the kiss. Jungkook's face was visible, the woman's hand on his chest, the moment just before their lips met. It spread like wildfire. Millions of views in hours. Comment sections turned cruel. Speculation hardened into certainty. Jungkook was labeled careless, selfish, disloyal. And Taehyung was cast as either the tragic victim or the foolish one who stayed too long. The company went into crisis mode. Phones rang non-stop. Emergency meetings were called. Legal teams analyzed every frame of the footage. Taehyung watched the video once. Then he closed his laptop. He didn't need proof anymore. What hurt wasn't seeing it again. It was knowing the world now owned a moment that had broken him. That night, Jungkook knocked on Taehyung's door. Taehyung didn't open it right away. When he finally did, Jungkook looked wrecked, eyes red, shoulders slumped, hands shaking. "I didn't say what they're claiming," Jungkook said immediately. "The captions are lies." "I know," Taehyung replied softly. That surprised them both. "You do?" Jungkook asked. "I know you wouldn't say those things," Taehyung said. "That's not what hurts anymore." Jungkook's voice cracked. "Then what does?" Taehyung stepped aside, letting him in. "The fact that even without the lies," Taehyung said, closing the door behind them, "the truth was already enough to destroy me." Jungkook sank onto the couch, covering his face. Taehyung stood across from him, arms crossed, heart pounding. "I don't know what happens next," Taehyung said honestly. "I don't know if I stay. I don't know if I leave." Jungkook looked up. "And me?" Taehyung hesitated. "You stay," he said finally, "but not because I need you, because you need to face what you did without running." Jungkook nodded, tears spilling freely now. "I will." Outside, the city moved on. Inside, two people stood in the ruins of something that had once felt unbreakable, unsure whether rebuilding was possible, or if surviving the wreckage was all they could hope for. The storm didn't slow down. It learned their names. Every headline felt sharper than the last. Every comment section became a courtroom where strangers decided who was guilty and who deserved forgiveness. The narrative twisted daily, reshaped by clicks and outrage. Taehyung stopped reading. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it hurt too much. He began waking up earlier before the world could demand explanations from him. Mornings became quiet rituals. Coffee gone cold. Curtains barely opened. Music played softly, songs with no words, sounds that didn't ask him to feel one thing or another. For the first time in years, he wondered who he was without the constant presence of someone else. Jungkook stayed visible. He attended schedules. He bowed deeper. He spoke less. When asked questions he wasn't allowed to answer, he accepted the silence without resentment. It was penance whether anyone noticed or not. They shared spaces but not intimacy. Passing glances replaced conversations. Distance replaced comfort. And yet, the absence between them felt louder than any argument they'd ever had. Then the woman returned. Not in person. In a statement. A post appeared late at night, written carefully, edited to sound calm and reasonable. She didn't deny the kiss. She framed it as a misunderstanding, a moment fueled by exhaustion and closeness. She claimed no intention to hurt anyone. She mentioned Jungkook's kindness, his vulnerability. She never mentioned Taehyung. That omission hurt more than accusation. By morning, the internet had chosen sides again. Some praised her honesty. Some blamed her entirely. Others questioned why Taehyung was still silent. Silence, it turned out, was the loudest thing he could offer. At an emergency meeting, the company laid out options, carefully worded apologies, temporary hiatuses, image recovery plans that felt more like erasure than healing. Taehyung listened. Then he spoke. "I want time," he said calmly. "Not a break, not a scandal pause, time to decide who I am when I'm not reacting to everyone else." The room stilled. This wasn't in the plan. Namjoon met his eyes, understanding flickering there. How much time? Taehyung inhaled. Enough. The decision wasn't announced publicly. Not yet. But internally everything shifted. Schedules were adjusted. Commitments redistributed. The machine adapted even as something human quietly stepped away. That night Taehyung packed again. Not in anger. Not in shock. With clarity. Each item placed in the suitcase felt intentional, a boundary drawn, a promise to himself he'd ignored for too long. Jungkook stood in the doorway, watching. "You're leaving," he said. "Yes." "For how long?" Taehyung zipped the bag closed. "I don't know." Jungkook nodded, throat tight. "Is there anything I can do?" Taehyung considered the question carefully. "Yes," he said. "Don't wait for me." Jungkook flinched. "What?" "Waiting keeps you stuck," Taehyung continued. "I need to walk forward without feeling like I'm dragging someone else's hope behind me." Jungkook's voice shook. "And if I still love you?" "Then learn how to live with that without letting it define you," Taehyung said gently. "Just like I have to." They stood there, surrounded by years of shared history, neither of them reaching out. At the door Taehyung paused. "This wasn't all your fault," he said quietly, "but it was enough to change me." Jungkook swallowed hard. "I never meant to lose you." "You didn't lose me," Taehyung replied. "You just don't get to keep me the same." The door closed softly. No dramatic exit. No cameras. Just the sound of a life-shifting direction. Days later, fans noticed. Taehyung's absence wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. Interviews went on without him. Performances adjusted formations. Questions were deflected with practiced grace. Speculation exploded again. But this time, Taehyung didn't watch it happen. He was somewhere quiet, somewhere unfamiliar, somewhere no one knew what he had been through. For the first time since the night everything shattered, he breathed without pain tightening his chest. He didn't know if love would find him again. He didn't know if Jungkook would ever truly heal. But he knew one thing with certainty. Leaving hadn't saved him. But staying would have destroyed him. And sometimes, choosing yourself is the bravest goodbye of all. Time didn't heal everything, but it changed the shape of the pain. Weeks turned into months. Headlines faded, replaced by newer scandals, newer faces, newer mistakes. The world moved on the way it always did, quickly, carelessly, leaving behind the people who had lived inside the story. Taehyung learned how to live outside of noise. He stayed off social media. He walked unfamiliar streets where no one recognized him. He wrote again, not for charts or stages, but for himself. Some days the songs were angry. Some days they were quiet. Most days they were unfinished. And that was okay. For the first time in his life, he wasn't rushing to turn emotion into performance. He let it exist. Jungkook changed too. The absence forced him to sit with himself in ways he'd always avoided. Without Taehyung as his anchor, he had to confront the parts of himself that sought validation too easily, that feared intensity, that confused attention with reassurance. He trained harder, spoke less, thought more. And every night, he wondered if growth meant anything if the person you wanted to show it to was no longer watching. They didn't speak. Not because of anger. Because silence was necessary. Until one day it was. The invitation was simple. No cameras, no press, no obligation, just a message passed quietly through Namjoon. A private studio session. One song. No expectations. Taehyung almost said no. Then he remembered why he had left in the first place. Not to escape Jungkook, but to meet himself. The studio smelled the same, wood, dust, memory. Jungkook was already there when Taehyung arrived, sitting on the floor with a guitar resting against his knee. He looked up slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might break the moment. They didn't hug. They didn't apologize. They just existed in the same space again. "You look different," Jungkook said. "So do you," Taehyung replied. And they both smiled faintly at the truth of it. They worked quietly, trading lines, adjusting chords, letting the music lead where words couldn't. There was no tension. No expectation of what this meant beyond the sound filling the room. Halfway through, Taehyung stopped singing. "This song," he said, voice steady, "it's not about us." Jungkook nodded, "I know. But it couldn't exist without us." "I know that too." That was enough. When the session ended, neither of them rushed to leave. "I don't want to hurt you again," Jungkook said finally. Taehyung met his eyes. "Then don't try to be who you were." "And you?" Jungkook asked softly. "I'm not who I was either." They stood there, not as broken halves looking to be repaired, but as two people who had survived something honest and painful and real. "Do you think," Jungkook asked, almost afraid of the answer, "that we ever get another chance?" Taehyung thought carefully. "Not the old one," he said. "That version of us is gone." Jungkook exhaled, accepting it. But Taehyung continued, "If we meet again someday, truly meet, without ownership, without fear, maybe." The word wasn't a promise. It was something better. Permission to breathe. They parted without drama, without regret. And for the first time, neither of them felt like they were losing something. Months later, Taehyung returned to the stage. Not as an explanation. Not as a statement. As himself. The crowd roared, the lights rose, the music swelled. And somewhere behind the curtain, Jungkook listened, not with longing, not with guilt, but with respect. Some love stories don't end with forever. They end with understanding. And sometimes that's the bravest ending of all. The world assumed the story was over. A return to the stage. A quiet smile. A performance that looked whole again. For the audience, that was enough. For Taehyung, it wasn't an ending. It was a continuation he had to learn how to live inside. After his return, the applause felt different. Not lighter, not heavier, just distant. He bowed, thanked the crowd, and moved backstage with a calm that surprised even him. The adrenaline faded quickly, leaving behind something steadier. Acceptance. Not of what had happened, but of what could never be undone. He no longer searched the wings for Jungkook, no longer wondered if a glance meant something more. He had learned the cost of reading too deeply into moments that weren't asking to be held. Jungkook noticed. He noticed the way Taehyung spoke with clarity now, the way he laughed without checking who was listening, the way he belonged to himself in a way he never had before. And oddly, that hurt more than distance ever did. They worked together again, professionally flawless. No tension, no coldness, just respect shaped by history. Fans called it maturity, growth, healing. Only they knew how much discipline it took to make it look that effortless. One night long after schedules ended, Jungkook stayed behind in the practice room. The mirrors reflected a version of himself he was still getting used to. Older, quieter, more careful with his heart. Taehyung entered without surprise. "I thought you'd still be here," he said. Jungkook smiled faintly. Old habits. They sat on opposite sides of the room, shoes off, backs against the wall. The silence between them was no longer sharp. It had softened with time. "I'm leaving again," Taehyung said. Jungkook's chest tightened, but he didn't panic. "For work." "For me." Jungkook nodded. "How long?" Taehyung shrugged. "Long enough not to miss myself." That made Jungkook laugh quietly. "You always say things like that now." "I learned how to," Taehyung replied. Jungkook looked at him then, really looked. "I'm glad you didn't disappear." "I didn't," Taehyung said gently. "I just stopped being reachable to everyone. That includes me." Taehyung didn't answer right away. "It includes the version of you that needed me to feel complete." Jungkook accepted that. Fair. They sat there, breathing in the familiarity without trying to claim it. "You know," Jungkook said, "I used to think love meant never letting go." Taehyung smiled. "I used to think it meant enduring everything. And now? Now I think love is knowing when to step back without turning bitter." Jungkook nodded slowly. "I'm still learning that part." "You will," Taehyung said. "Just don't rush it." When Taehyung stood to leave, Jungkook spoke again. If we meet again outside all this, no stage, no expectations, do you think we'd recognize each other?" Taehyung considered the question, hand resting on the door. "I hope not," he said softly. "I hope we meet as strangers who choose each other honestly." Jungkook smiled, eyes burning slightly. "I'd like that." Taehyung left without looking back. Months passed. Taehyung traveled quietly. He took photos no one would ever see. He wrote songs no one had asked for. He learned how to sit with loneliness without labeling it as loss. Sometimes he thought of Jungkook. Not with longing. With gratitude. For loving him imperfectly. For hurting him unintentionally. For forcing him to choose himself when he never would have otherwise. Jungkook watched from afar, not through screens but through the subtle shifts in himself. He stopped seeking approval in mirrors that didn't know him. He learned how to say no, how to be alone without feeling abandoned. And one day, without warning, it stopped hurting to remember. The story the world had consumed was reduced to trivia. Old clips resurfaced occasionally, dissected by new fans who didn't know the weight behind the smiles. But the truth lived elsewhere. In the quiet decisions. In the space they gave each other. In the people they became because something once fell apart. Somewhere, Taehyung sang softly to himself in a room with open windows. Somewhere else, Jungkook listened to music without needing to be seen. And the love that once burned too hot to survive transformed into something calmer. Not ownership, not regret, just understanding.